MTG Speculator Podcast, episode number 30. Today is Thursday, June 8th, 2017. I'm Massimo, and welcome my very good bud, Mr. Dan Marquez.
Hello.
Dan's a really good friend of mine, and today we're going to be chatting our GP Montreal tournament, which was like 3 weeks ago.
Yep, 3 weeks ago. Sounds about right.
We both prized. I finished 11th, and Dan, you finished 60th?
60th, that's correct. Thank you for rubbing that in. You are a big jerk.
And we're just going to go through our tournament results for that. But, Dan, why don't you introduce yourself a bit to those at home?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Marquez. I've been playing Magic since Magic, as I realized a couple of years ago. So I've been playing Magic since, I think, grade 2 or 3, when Magic came out. And yet, I don't have any of the really good stuff that you'd hope I would have. Unfortunately, because I was a small child at the time.
Makes sense.
I kept cards like Lord of the Pit instead of Black Lotus. But,
True.
Oh well. And I guess my one other Magic fun fact is I once almost qualified for the PT. I qualified for it by winning a PTQ. That was before there were PPTQs, because I'm old. And it was during my grade 12 final exams, so I had to swap with the guy who got second, and couldn't go to the PT. But, oh well, that's the past.
On to the future.
Onto the future.
Onto GP Montreal 2017.
Which is also the past.
Correct.
But the future, as far as that other story is concerned.
Yeah. So, as a heads up, again, this isn't a MTG Finance episode. This is just us chatting, having a good time, and filling in all the spikes and all our friends, the listener and stuff, on how we did at the tournament. We've got some funny stories to tell along the way. Some interesting things happened, and I think we were both really happy with our results in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy. Some great moments along the way, some moments of heartbreak, but overall, really exciting result.
Yes. So I finished 12-3.
Yeah, and I finished 11-4.
Yes.
I think for me that was 7-2 day 1 and 4-2 on day 2. And Massimo, that was 8-1 day 1 for you.
Well, I had a bye, so it's more like 7-1 day 1.
7-1 and a freebie because you're just that cool. And also 4-2 on day 2.
Correct.
With each of us getting to some pain and hardship in round 14. Yours a little bit more visible than mine.
True.
But we'll get there.
We'll get there. We'll get to the stories in between.
We'll get there.
I think we're just gonna before we talk our round by rounds, I just want to give a little bit of insight into where our headspace was, what decks we registered, what we were thinking on our way leading up to the tournament. Dan, do you want to start?
Sure. So, going into the tournament, I was kind of all over the place. I knew that Marvel was going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm. I suspected that Mardu was going to be a big deal, more than it ultimately ended up being, I think. Mm-hmm. And obviously, Zombies was also very real. I wanted to play something that was reasonably well paired up against the Marvel matchup, but I didn't really want to play something that was actively attacking its game plan. I just wanted to err on the side of playing a consistent, very aggressive game, and then forcing people to have some way to deal with it or die. And for the most part, they chose die, with a few notable exceptions. So long story short, or long story already long, I ended up on an aggro build of GB Constrictor.
Like sort of like an energy build?
Yeah, it was like counters energy, much more low to the ground, topping out at 3 drops. So the top end of my curve was Rishkar's and Nissa's, and Yeheni's Expertise out of the board. Nothing bigger than that. Mm-hmm. 18 land. Very aggressive, very low to the ground.
With 4 tunes.
4 tunes, yeah. And the magic for Oath of Nissa.
Yeah.
Because when you're allowed to play Ponder, just play Ponder.
True.
Ponder's great.
Ponder is great.
Ponder. Oath of Nissa is the card that, whenever I play Standard, I find an opportunity to play Oath of Nissa, because that, every time I draw that card, I'm never unhappy to see that card in my hand. Because early on, it's a land drop. Sometimes it smooths out my ability to play a Nissa or a Lily, or if I'm going with some sort of like weird 5-color Super Friends build, it smooths you into Sorin or something. And And later on, instead of a land, it's gas. It's like a walker, or it's a great creature. It's card selection. I love that card. And fun little thing that's come up more than no times. Playing an Oath of Nissa, when you already have one, sacking to Legend Rule, and then Fatal Pushing for the full 4. Killing their Kalidas, killing whatever else they've got out that's beefier.
It's
Tyler's
value.
Tracker. It's very real, and no one ever expects it, and it's glorious.
Yeah, so for me, I ended up on Mardu Blue because I was playing Mardu in the previous season, and I was pretty comfortable with the deck. But in the week leading up to the tournament, I was playing on Magic Online. Sam, who you guys know, is away working in Alberta, so he gave me basically his whole Magic Online account. So I just got to like flip his Marvel deck right after the PT, which was super convenient because it spiked super aggressively in price. Bought into Mardu, and then I just started getting wrecked by Marvel decks. So I was like, I can't just play straight Mardu. So I ended up sticking with Mardu Blue for the counterspells in the sideboard, and it served me very, very well.
Fun fact for all you out there, Marvel as a deck is good.
It's very good.
Yeah. But it's got that wacky variance. And I think that the deck choices that Massimo and I chose to play are an interesting contrast in the ways that you can come to the table for this metagame right now.
Yeah.
I think coming to the table with something that is trying to level the format so much that you're all the way back around the beginning and you can't beat Marvel is a mistake. And I think that your alternatives are either trying to fight them by having a game plan that undermines what they're trying to accomplish, either through discard, which is the weaker option, or artifact removal, which is the extra weaker option.
Yeah.
Or ideally counter magic,
Yeah.
which is where you went with.
Yep.
Or just trying to force them into a position where if they don't hit their optimal turn 4 Ulamog, which I don't recall exactly, but I think I remember seeing an article saying that realistically the percentage on that happening on the first spin is something like 8%, like it's quite low. So realistically, if they don't hit that like 1 in 10, then they just lose.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be playing something that does one of those two things. Otherwise, you're going to hit 4, 5, 6 matchups in your tournament that are going to be just unwinnable.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely agree. And like that was true for the GP, and I still think that's
It's
true.
still very much true. And I think it's interesting. We were talking about this earlier. It's interesting that the winners of pretty much every big tournament in the last month or so, the number one slot has always gone to Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's indicative not necessarily of the fact that the deck is insane. I think it's very strong, but it has that variance. But whoever is both A, good, and B, gets that luck or has a unique spin on Marvel that particular week, they jet right to the top.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Marvel plus good luck equals unstoppable.
Definitely.
So it's not surprising that they made to the top spot.
Yeah. We're going to come back to like what we think about the format now, and like we're probably going to touch on the potential upcoming banning. Spoiler, I don't think it's happening.
Lol, 0%.
Yeah. But we'll get to it at the end. But now we're just going to like talk round by round. Hopefully this is useful to like anyone at home who's thinking about playing either Black-Green Energy or some sort of Mardu variant moving forward. All right, so let's talk round 1. This is a good one. So for me, I had a bye, but Dan.
Oh no.
Oh, Dan. Dan has a story.
Okay. So round 1 of my tournament was not the best start for me. Made all the worse by the fact that Massimo and some of my other friends that were also there with us in Montreal were there watching because one of them had a bye and one of them was playing in a side event. So going into the match, it started to unfold, and my opponent was playing some cards that, while potentially effective in certain niche situations, were objectively not that powerful. And this is the nicest way of saying it that I think I can, but a lot of the cards that I was seeing across the table for me were objectively bad.
Yep.
Authority of the Consuls.
Turn 1 Authority of the Consuls.
Turn 1, and then turn 4 second Authority of the Consuls, because you just can't get enough.
Yep.
Oketra's Monument.
Yeah.
Anyway, so moral of the story, the deck was a mono-white
Audric
deck. It was a deck attempting to take advantage of the card Audric something.
I forget. The object.
From the Shadows of Innistrad creature, 4 mana, 3/3. And at the beginning of combat, I think on each turn, all of your creatures gain all the keywords that all your other creatures have.
Yeah.
So this deck plays that creature along with cards like Gisela, along with cards like Aerial Responder for the Flying Vigilance Lifelink.
I like how you're getting real deep on this deck tech right now.
Yeah, everyone's got to know because moral of the story, because the outcome was not great. I lost in 3 against this deck.
Wait, you lost in 3? I thought you won. I thought you lost in both games.
No, I lost in 3.
Oh, you lost in 3.
I lost in 3.
Okay.
And it was unpleasant because seeing all those cards roll out on the other side of the table, and then losing to them, not the best feeling, not the best way to start a tournament for sure, although I'm certain it redoubled my efforts.
Yeah.
But it also taught me a couple of legitimate lessons. One, an actual lesson in how to sideboard, learning about where Yeheni's expertise was effective. Pro tip: it's when all of your creatures on the other side of the table have 3 toughness.
Yeah, didn't bring it in.
I just want to get clear. This is making me sound like I'm really, really bad at Magic. I mean, this was a mistake for sure.
Yeah.
But the other thing that it taught me, and I think it was based on some of Massimo's comments after the fact, was I think I bring a little bit too much nice guy to the table when I play Magic in competitive settings. Like I let my opponents get away with more than they probably should, or let things slide more than I probably should. Mm-hmm. And I think it's ultimately a decision that you have to make for yourself on your own play style and how you want to approach tournament settings. But I mean, I go to have fun, but I also want to win and I want to be competitive. And I do think that, and I'm sure that this is something that a lot of other people out there struggle with as well, is where that fine line is between, being a nice guy, having a nice time, but not letting people get away with things that they objectively shouldn't.
Yes, definitely.
And, in this situation, I think there was a couple of strange instances where I could have or should have called a judge and didn't. And in retrospect, I wish that I had. Mm-hmm. And I think for the future, it's definitely a learning for me.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, you don't play a ton of tournament Magic as it is, right?
Correct.
So I think that, and thank God it was your first round. You know what I mean? And I was able to watch and be like, all these weird things happened, like, probably should have called the judge in scenario A and B, which is good, right? At least it's at the beginning of the tournament and not like halfway through.
Yeah, and you'd think I would have learned this after 24 years of playing Magic.
Yeah, true.
But, live and learn, I guess.
Yeah. Dude, we're all learning, man. Yeah, from my perspective, this match was bizarre in that I'm watching game 1 and I see a turn 1 authority of the consoles and I'm like, okay, Dan's going to win. It's fine. And then he floods and I'm like, okay, he lost. But he's still going to crush this, like, obviously terrible deck. And then you 1 and 2, and then on turn game 3, me and my bud, who was also watching, his opponent goes, Plains go, Oketra's Monument, and my friend and I turned around and started, like, almost laughing at Oketra's Monument in play at a standard GP.
Yeah, and to be fair, this is because Massimo is a bad person.
Yes.
That's objectively just
I really hope your opponent didn't notice. I felt bad.
A morally flawed individual. Yeah.
Yeah, but Oketra's Monument is not standard playable. Don't put it in your decks. I think that's the takeaway from this round.
Pro tip from Massimo.
So Dan starts at an unfortunate 0-1.
Correct.
Against an obviously poor build, but I believe that he'll rally, and he does. Let's go to round 2. I'll start on this one. So I was up against surprise Teamer Marvel.
So Teamer Marvel was at this tournament.
It was everywhere.
Oh my god.
So
Massimo, how many Teamer Marvel matchups did you ultimately end up facing?
I think it was 9.
9 out of 15 rounds.
9 out of 14 rounds.
9 out of 14 rounds.
It was either 8 or 9. I have to double check my notes, but I guess we'll get through it.
It's too many.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Although, when you go in with the build that you went in with, that's probably going to make you pretty happy.
In comparison to what I was going to play,
correct. Yeah.
I made a very good choice in adding the blue, even though it might have hurt some of my other matchups that I never saw.
Sure.
Except for when
and some matchups that everyone saw.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay.
There's a lot of alluding to the future happening in this podcast.
Yeah. There's just good jokes. Good memorable moments. Alright, I'm gonna talk about the games now. Dan and I are just killing ourselves here. So Teamer Marvel, game 1. He lands the Marvel. I don't have any interaction in my main board, so he spins, finds the Chandra. He kills my Gideon, but I kill his Chandra on the crackback. And his second spin whiffs, and that's enough for me to just completely crush him and run him over. In game 2, this is interesting. I represent a ceremonious rejection in going into his turn 4, and my opponent could not give a shit. And he just jams his Aetherworks Marvel and just gets that turn 4 Ulamog. And I scoop up my cards, and we go to game 3. So in game 3, my opponent gets stuck on 2 lands. And then I managed to counterspell anything that was relevant. So I think I countered a Whirler Virtuoso and the Chandra or Marvel, and that was it.
And Massimo, for our listeners at home, how many post board counterspells at kind of full capacity are you carrying? It's
a good question. So you can check out my list. I'll link both of our lists in the episode description, but. For me, I was running 2 ceremonious rejections and 3 metallic rebukes. This was a small deviation from what a lot of the other pros were recommending, which was 2 negates over 2 ceremonious rejections. But I am so certain that ceremonious was the right choice. The number of times that I had to pass on turn 4 with a Gideon in my hand to leave up a ceremonious rejection, and then they play around it, and then I jam Gideon on 5. And then get them because they're just going to lose the Gideon.
Yeah.
They have to go for it was at least that decision probably won me 2 or 3 matches.
Yeah. I also think that there is some side value of ceremonious rejection that people don't necessarily take into account.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, beyond the obvious artifact targets, Heart of Kirin, Aetherworks Marvel, and if you want to go for something like a Puzzle Knot, that can be very legitimate.
Yeah,
a Puzzle Knot does represent 1 additional spin, after all.
Yes, exactly.
You're also talking about their hard cast Ulamogs.
Yes.
Their marveled Ulamogs.
Yes.
Right? So you lose some cards, but you don't have this unstoppable threat on the board.
Yeah, that's just going to kill you in 2 swings.
Right. And other things like Spell Shrivel, which a lot of people forget, Void Shatter. Right, those are colorless cards.
They are,
right, that are being played. A lot of Rogue Brews and a lot of the very very tuned blue red or blue black controlled decks. They're being spicy and they're playing these alternative counter spells.
Yeah.
For a lot of legitimate reasons, and the real possibility of using a 1 mana counter on that stuff is very
spicy.
Powerful. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I think Ceremonious is the right choice. I don't personally remember ever bringing it in against anyone but Marvel. But Dan is certainly correct in that there is value there in addition to just hitting Marvel, for sure. Countering Puzzle Knots is super relevant once they've hit their Marvel. Yeah. I've countered my fair share of Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot.
Right, especially because the Marvel into Puzzle Knot to refuel for another spin into something else that lets them refuel for another spin is how they keep chaining value together.
Yeah.
And sometimes being able to interrupt that means that they're off spinning for sometimes 2 turns,
and that's enough.
And yeah, when you're smashing in the air for 4 or 5, that's very, very real very quickly.
Definitely. Do you want to talk about your round 2, Dan?
Sure. Round 2, ultimately a little bit more successful for me. I faced a Grixis controlled deck. Interesting build, interesting approach, but ultimately felt like the deck was maybe trying to do a little bit too much.
Mm-hmm.
1 and 2, I think. I could be wrong on all the 1 and 2s, 1 and 3s, whatever. But the build was ultimately playing a lot of double color spells. So they were fully in red, blue, and black for Grasp of Darkness, Chandra, Liliana, Yaheni's Expertise, and I feel like trying to be so deeply in all 3 colors meant that they stumbled far more than was acceptable against a deck applying as much pressure as my deck was.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, let's move to round 3. So round 3, I'm up against Teamer Marvel. What a surprise. So apparently game 1 was identical to game 1 of round 2, in which their first spin hits a Chandra. We trade Gideon for Chandra. Their second spin misses and I win. Apparently like the same game, according to my notes. Game 2, my opponent is again stuck on lands. I play around a Censor and counter a Whirler Virtuoso. My first Gideon gets negated, but my second one resolves. This was up against another Toronto local, Keith, who apparently didn't get the bye he was supposed to get for this tournament, so I just felt super bad for him. People, if you've earned your buys, I definitely double check that you have the right number of buys going into a tournament, because you do not want to get a round 2 loss when you're supposed to have a win.
It's the really bad version of the sleep-in special.
Yeah. Much worse.
Yeah.
So that was my round 2. Sorry, Keith.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, do you want to do round 2?
I just did round 2.
Oh, sorry, that was round 3, right? Do you want to do round 3?
Was that round 3?
That was round 3. I screwed up.
Right. Sure. Okay, so I'll explain. I guess I'll explain a few more of these matches a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'll explain a couple of other matchups that I ultimately faced, which were 2 humans variants, and then we'll kind of bounce back and forth. And when it comes back to me, I'll explain how all of my Marvel matchups went, and then I'll save that for next, and I'll explain how all my zombies matchups go, because that was the one other loss I took in day 1 was to a zombies deck.
Okay.
So I'll start with the humans builds. So I came up against a red-white, very aggressive humans build, which was certainly doing some interesting stuff. Thalia's Lieutenant is still as scary as ever, or it certainly can be. But that deck is a lot less effective when you have both Walking Ballista and Winding Constrictor. A deck that's mono 1 toughness does not like to see a Walking Ballista on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
And I think in game 3 or game 2, I don't know if that was a win in 2 or win in 3, as per my usual, but for the purpose of that matchup, I had Yeheni's Expertise hidden in my hand for the duration of the game, and it was entirely unnecessary. I think my board state grew very large very quickly, and I think that was the first matchup where I uncovered the fun fact that came up quite a few times in the tournament, which is a clue is a really good way to activate Fatal Push.
Very good.
Yeah. So a Thalia Heretic Cathar died to a post-clue Fatal Push off of their Declaration in Stone.
Sweet.
Objectively the worst Declaration in Stone they've ever cast. And the red-white humans deck, not so good against Ballista. And the green-white humans deck, interesting, trying to go a little bit bigger, trying to be a little bit cute, I think, with Ulvenwald Mysteries.
Oh, yeah.
Where when one of your guys dies, you get
a
a clue, and when you sack a clue, you get a human. So, interesting synergy, but ultimately a little bit slow, and my deck is able to go a lot bigger, a lot faster than their strategy is, and I was ultimately successful when I was able to completely blow them out through a Never to Return on their Sigarda. When they tapped out for Sigarda, put their own defenses down, and then Never to Return on the Sigarda wrapped up the game.
Cool. So that was your round 4 and 5?
It was some mix of some of the other rounds. I'm not exactly certain which ones were which, but over the course of the next few rounds and earlier on in the tournament, I faced a green-white humans build, trying to go a little bit bigger, be a little bit trickier, and gain some more card advantage via trackers and things like that, and Sigarda, and then a much more lower to the ground red-white build with like Bloodlust Inciter and Metallic Mimic, trying to be topping out at 3, topping out at 2 maybe. Very, very low to the ground.
All right, my round 4, I bet you can guess, was Teamer Marvel.
Oh, I've heard about this deck.
Yeah, so this is my first loss of the event. Game 1, I apparently keep a bad hand. Oh, and my opponent ended up hardcasting Ulamog, which could only be my fault. There's no scenario in which Game 1 happens. They don't end up find a Marvel at all, and they end up winning the game. That I obviously messed something up along the lines. I think I just kept it just an unkeepable Game 1 hand. And I think this was the learning point for me, where I should look at my opening hands as though I'm playing Teamer Marvel every match. Regardless of what my opponent's on, I need to be doing something very proactive, and my majority of my opponents are going to be on Teamer Marvel anyways. So just mulligan as though they're a Temur Marvel, and you're going to be in a much better spot.
Yeah, I think an interesting rule would be mulligan, assuming your opponent will hit a turn 6 Ulamog.
Yeah, true.
Right? Because you're never going to beat a turn 4 Ulamog, so don't focus on that.
Yeah.
And a turn 5 Ulamog means that they're still pretty lucky, and that's probably going to be rough. But I think if you can try to get in underneath like a really good spin on turn 6, with something like my deck or something like a build of Mardu, or even something like zombies, I think that should be your objective.
Yep. This is in game 2. I have a strong curve out. He hits Ulamog too late and still gets wrecked. So that was good. Game 3.
Beating Ulamog is always a uniquely satisfying experience.
It's so satisfying. Game 3, I mull to 6, and I get stuck on 2 lands, and my opponent kills me with Rogue Refiners. So that was a loss, an unfortunate loss. First loss of the day. Let's go to round 5.
First and only.
First and only loss of the day.
First and only, because Massimo, he's real good.
I'm not bad.
He's like, is it my turn? You want me to
say more things? I was going to go to round 5, because you talked about a couple rounds already.
Wow, fine. No.
So, round 5, Temur Marvel, to no one's surprise. So this is 4 Marvel players in a row. Game 1, my opponent never finds Marvel, which is a recipe for disaster. Game 2, my only note is Ulamog is good. So clearly he spun into an Ulamog early enough. And then game 3, strong curve and counterspells will crush a Marvel player every time. Yeah. So that's an easy win for another win for Massimo.
Yeah, I think in your matchups, what's really interesting to me is that because all of your counters are quite cheap, you're able to still keep both doing 2 things. One, applying more and more pressure every turn. So it's not like you have to hold up disallow. Right? Yes. You're holding up things that cost 1 or 2 mana, which is huge. So, and at the same time, you're also able to hold up removal for the roadblocks they're throwing your way. The Rogue Refiners, the Servants of the Conduit, to a lesser extent, obviously, all their Thopter tokens and Whirler Virtuosos, but being able to knock those things out of the way with enough mana to play another threat and potentially still counter something.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Is extremely challenging for a Marvel player like that's trying to beat you on one of those axes to do.
Unlicensed Disintegration is still very good against them. Like if you're on the play or you're even on the draw and they like Rogue Refiner you, like unlicensing them and attacking is like really good. Or if you want to hold up a counterspell like turn 4, you unlicense leave up Ceremonious or something, like it's very, very good.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about some of your other matchups before I go to round 6?
Sure. Okay, so I'll get into the matchup that I faced 4 total times over the course of the tournament. I believe I faced it twice on day 1. One of which was a loss. My second loss. My first loss to a real deck. And a loss to a guy that ultimately made it to the top 8, so I don't feel so bad. The matchup against zombies is pretty tough. I only faced the mono black version of zombies all day. Yeah. Which I do think is the better build. Although a deck like mine is pretty scared to see something like Binding Mummy. Nonetheless, I think the mono black version is so consistent and can build up such a large and wide army that it can be pretty tough to deal with. My experience in this matchup was, and I still went 3-1 against this deck over the course of the tournament.
Very good.
But the secret sauce here is that you have to focus on strategies that let you go bigger faster than they do. Because you do have that ability, theirs is very dependent on drawing the right lords and having those lords not die. If you get to the point of the game where they're casting Liliana's Masteries, you're probably not going to be successful. Anyway, so I think the matchups where I won, it was always close. It usually came down to kind of a matter of extra inches and going a little bit bigger. This is also the board stalls on the ground, which was a big issue with zombies. Is where I learned another neat trick associated with my deck. So my deck had the 3 of Greenbelt Rampager for the value and the big small creature or the big cheap creature. The fun pro tip with that card and Long Tusk Cub is when you have Winding Constrictor out, 1 green mana turns into 2 permanent +1/+1 counters on your Long Tusk Cub.
Yep.
You play it when you have no energy or just 1 energy. The Constrictor will give you 2 energy in exchange for bouncing back your elephant.
Yes.
And you use that 2 energy right away, and then you use 1 more green mana to play it again, bounce it back, get 2 more energy, and keep doing that until your Long Tusk Cub is just the biggest thing on the field, and that can do a lot of work.
So not only is it super cute, but it's really relevant in this matchup, is what you're saying.
Yeah, going bigger than them and giving you something that can beat a 7/7 Diregraph Colossus can be very real. Mm-hmm. The biggest learning, I think, for me, if I'm going to play this deck in the future, I think some great tech that we talked about after, is some number of copies of Ronus, the new 3-mana green god, for its ability, A, to be a fairly big threat that's not that hard to reach with this deck and all the counters it throws around, but more importantly, the ability to provide trample to some of your big creatures. I think that was the biggest issue against the ground stall decks, is there's no flying in my deck, there's no trample, so you end up with a lot of large guys that
just get chump blocked.
Yeah, and chump blocked, or when you're talking about you've got 5 guys, I've got 5 guys, and they're all huge, the attacker is always on the disadvantage,
Definitely.
Right? Because they can arrange it to kill your guys to minimal loss. So that was my learning from zombies. The Henny's expertise is out of the sideboard that Massimo recommended before the tournament. Did a good bit of work in this matchup, although it is not that uncommon. You get to a spot in which -3/-3 is not enough.
Yes.
Which is terrifying.
You have to fire it off right away.
Yeah, you need to get there pretty early, but overall, that card is quite strong.
Sweet. Let's go to my round 6. I'm up against Mystery Matchup.
Oh.
They lead with turn 1 Spirebluff Canal.
Could be anything.
It could be anything. It could be Teamer Marvel.
Could be.
Turns out it was actually Blue-Red Emerge. Oh, what's this spice? So,
you just said it's Blue-Red Emerge.
Yeah, Blue-Red. It was Blue-Red Emerge, indeed. So in game 1,
there's no more mystery, Massimo.
Yeah, I guess I could have left the suspense up.
Yeah.
In game 1, I clocked down my opponent, and he ended up scooping 1 land away from an Elder Deep Fiend with not 1, not 2, but 3 Kozilek's Returns in his graveyard. So it was kind of awkward. And then in game 2, a late showing of Stitchwing Scab, he hard cast the Stitchwing Scab, followed up by me on a turn 4 Gideon. Turn 4 Gideon, turn 4 Stitchwing Scab, turn 5, just kill your Stitchwing Scab, get it off the board, make sure you can't sack it to EDF, was just more than enough to just run my opponent over. This was a really interesting one because I think my opponent just really incorrectly sequenced their plays, where they were more than happy to cast their sack cards instead of discarding them and bringing them back for a lower mana cost. And his Elder Deep Fiends just ended up stuck in his hand both games. So if you're playing that deck, never cast them unless you have the mana ready and available to sack them for Elder Deep Fiend right away. It's worth the card disadvantage. You're just going to fall behind on mana advantage, especially if you have 3 Kozilek's Return in your graveyard. So
Massimo's key tip for people playing the Emerge deck is play the strategy of your deck. As opposed to not.
Yes. Go mana over cards.
Yeah. Do the thing your deck is supposed to do instead of playing a spicy game of Limited.
Well put.
Don't get me wrong. Stitchwing. It's really great in draft.
Well put.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to round 7. This is Teamer Marvel. Game 1, I have turn 4 Ulamog is good. So that sounds like a straight loss in game 1.
Fact.
In game 2, my opponent never draws Marvel, and I run them over. It's a pretty good way to win. And this is game 3. My notes are, my opponent was up by a ceremonious rejection. It was Nutters. Perfect opening hand. 2 Toolcrafts, 1 Ceremonious, 1 Metallic Rebuke, 1 Heart of Kirin, 1 Plains, 1 Spire of Industry. So I basically had the nut draw of turn 1 Toolcraft.
Is that 8 cards?
No, 2 Toolcrafts, 1 Ceremonious, 1 Metallic, 1 Heart of Kirin, Plains, and a Spire of Industry. Yeah, it's 7.
Okay, I take it back.
Yeah, I didn't cheat. So turn 1 Toolcraft, turn 2 Heart of Kirin, turn 3, play another Toolcraft, attack for 7. I don't know. I don't remember what I drew, but I doubt it mattered. So yeah, that was a good time for me.
It's one of those games that unwinds and reminds you of why Mardu was so dominant for a little while there.
Definitely. Should I go to round 8 or did you want to? Oh, okay, I'll keep going. So round 8, turn one Spire or whatever, blue-red fast land. No, it's blue-red control this time, which is the nuts for me. I was like super happy to finally see that across the table. Game 1, I managed to get under the first Gear Hulk, which is oftentimes the key to winning this matchup. Another sweet takeaway from playing this matchup a lot is never play into 3 open mana, because they will have a counterspell, but always play into 4 open mana. 4 or 5 open mana. Glimmer of Genius is a really crucial part to their game plan. You wouldn't think that a card advantage spell is so important to them, but them being able to not sculpt their hand really, really makes things difficult. So if you're on the play and you have the option to turn 4 Gideon and they have 3 mana open, you really shouldn't, in my opinion. You should do anything else with your mana you can. What you want to do is wait until they have 4 open mana and then jam your Gideon. It will get countered, but them missing their turn 5 or 6 land drop, like slowing them down 1 or 2 turns from Gear Hulk, makes all the difference in the world.
And there's something to be said for putting them in a position where they may not have that card where they want it, which is in their graveyard. So that they can play that Gear Hulk for the extra, effectively 3 cards worth of card advantage, because Scry 2 and 2 cards is arguably about up 3. Worth of value 6, plus your flashy 5/6 that probably ate something.
So, definitely. And like keeping disallows out of their yard is good, because now their Gear Hulks have a harder time interacting with your spells. Right? So game 2, my opponent casts 4 Gear Hulks before I concede. I don't know why I waited this long, but apparently it took 4 Gear Hulks for me to scoop up my cards.
Gear Hulk is good.
It's a good card. Game 3.
We're talking about Torrential Gear Hulk here, just in case it was unclear. There are 4 other ones.
No, I think people know.
There's really only the one. There's like 1.5 other Gear Hulks as far as everyone is concerned.
I mean,
Verdurous is real.
Verdurous is real.
And Noxious is a one of in like a deck once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, if any of these 4 Gear Hulks were Combustible Gear Hulk, I think I would have won.
Combustible Gear Hulk makes me cry in my heart.
It's such a bad card.
I wish it did literally anything else.
People say the variance in Marvel is bad. they forgot about Dredge.
Ironically, I've seen Combustible Gear Hulk in some lists in Legacy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Fascinating, but not standard. Not standard.
Little different.
Little different. Yeah. Game 3, I jam a Gideon when they have 4 open mana, and they don't have a counterspell, and they get to Glimmer. So the benefit of jamming on 4 in another way is if they don't have a counterspell, you just win the game because Gideon has resolved. So a key part of this matchup, of course, is resolving a Gideon, and if you do that, you will win.
Yeah, that's the 4th line of text on Gideon.
Yeah.
-0 win target game.
If your opponent has on blue-red control.
Yeah.
They probably Gear Hulk on turn 6, but I have Unlicensed, and that's the end of that.
Neat.
Yeah. I'm going to go to round 9, and then you can do some more takeaways for the day.
Do it.
Round 9, my opponent goes turn 1 Spirebluff Canal, but turns out it is Temur Marvel this time again. So I faced Temur Marvel 6 times in my 8.
On day 1.
And day 1 in my 8 matches. And so, game 1, let's see what I said. Opponent dead to a normal spell, to a removal spell, which I didn't have. Oh, I understand. So, my opponent makes some plays, maybe it was the only play they had, but any removal spell in my hand or off the top is lethal on board, and I failed to find it for multiple turns. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 turns where they were dead to a removal spell, and it just didn't happen.
And how many did you play in your deck?
So in my main board, I had 2 Fatal Push, 2 Cut to Ribbons, 4 Unlicensed Disintegration. And I don't remember how many I'd cast before that. Probably 1. I just didn't find it. And then I missed lethal on board with a Scrap Heap Scrounger in my graveyard, so I could have brought it back, crewed, and then attacked for lethal as opposed to bringing him to 1.
Yeah.
And my opponent actually spins Marvel And like, I don't know if he found an Ulamog, but he found something that like almost stabilized. Or I gave him an extra Marvel spin. That's probably what it was. And I almost got super punished, but I did actually end up closing out that game. So in the end, I guess it wasn't too bad.
But before we move on from your matchup, I'm curious if you want to maybe give an explanation of your choice of Cut to Ribbons in the deck. I think it's a deck card that's definitely seeing some play.
Yes.
It's definitely a little bit more of an off the beaten path choice.
Yes.
How did that card perform for you?
I think it underperformed for me. Cut to Ribbons is supposed to be good in the mirror because it hits the majority of their relevant large threats, Avacyn or Glorybringer, if they're playing either of those. And just having enough removal in the main deck is also very good in the mirror. But otherwise, it kind of underperformed in that it's not usually very good against Marvel. You often take it out, and game one, it's rarely going to matter. If they're dead, they're dead, and that 4 points or 3 points of reach often won't make a difference. I think in retrospect, they should have been Declarations in Stones. And this is something I did want to mention about my round 14 opponent, who did end up top 8ing, which I'll get into, but I think Declaration in Stone, specifically for this event, would have been a much better choice.
And was the 4-color configuration you were on, did that basically completely knock Grasp of Darkness out of consideration for your deck?
Yeah, Grasp has never been you just can't afford it. I think there were some, like, in the previous standard format, there were black-white splash red decks that maybe could have supported Grasp of Darkness, but yeah, the mana, there's just no way to reliably cast that. You're willing to take the sorcery speed. Plus, you do get the Aftermath bonus, so there is some
value
balance
there, yeah.
Definitely. Okay. Game 2 in round 9. I choose to unlicense a Virtuoso rather than hold up a counterspell, just to try and get damage in. But my opponent lands Marvel, but without enough energy to spin it. I counter a Virtuoso to keep him off Marvel for an additional turn, and he ends up spinning a few turns later into an Ulamog that kills a Heart of Kieran and a Gideon, but he can't attack because it would provide me lethal attacks on the Crackback. And I top deck the sweetest deck in Stone I had seen to this day, to that moment. There's a better one later in the tournament. And I also have an Unlicensed in hand. So I managed to Ulamog, exile his Ulamog, and kill another blocker with 3 damage to the face, and close out the game. So it was a quick 2-game win in round 9. So that's our day 1s.
And that brings you to what record against Marvel?
So that against Marvel, I faced it 7 times, and I went 6-1 in day 1 against Marvel.
It's a lot of Marvel.
Yeah, man. There's a lot of Marvel. So I finished 8-1. Wait.
So you faced it 6 times. So you went 5-1 against Marvel.
Wait, what?
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Blue, red, and merged.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot I had a bye. I faced it 6 times.
You forgot that you were just that cool.
I was just that cool to have a bye. 6 times, and I went 5-1 against Marvel game 1.
Not bad.
Around day 1, yeah.
Not bad against the quote-unquote best deck.
Best deck, right? And you finished 7-2.
7-2,
Yep.
with 1 loss to a very strong Zombies player, and 1 loss to objectively the opposite, because it was literally mono white versus literally mono black, and also a great deck versus not a great deck.
Yep, definitely. So moving on to day 2, I was like, hey, this is going pretty good, and there's actually like a decent chance I can like top 8 this event if I continue to go strong. I was really happy for Dan's performance because for both of us, it's kind of like the first time that we've done like really well in like a day 1, I think.
Yeah, and I think I found it really satisfying because, I like going to these bigger events when I can, which is not all that often, but I do when I can. I really prefer the constructed format events to the limited format ones.
Yep.
Because I'd rather win on the merits of the analysis going into it, metagaming, coming with just the right tuned build, than because I happened into a great sealed pool.
Fair enough.
So going, making day 2 and being successful in this, caliber of an event in constructed felt like a vindication of, the work going into figuring out where we thought the meta would be.
Definitely. I definitely agree. My round 10 It was against Team or Marvel. I feel like this episode is just... I could have just recorded the first one and then just copied and pasted it a bunch of times.
Team or Marvel. Team or Marvel.
So I don't remember what happened this match. I think my opponent never drew Marvel. That's the only note I have. I can't remember. I didn't write down notes for this particular match.
When your opponent doesn't draw Marvel, you're just playing the worst energy deck
that's ever existed.
Yeah.
It's true.
Especially game one. You're just playing this deck that has okay, I play some cards, and by the way, here's a bad artifact.
Yeah, really bad one. I like to gain life with my energy, please.
Neat.
Do you want to talk about some of your other matchups on day 2?
Sure. So day 2 ultimately went 4-2. Now here's where I'll talk about all the experiences that I had with Marvel. Because I'm sure you're not bored of listening to stuff about Marvel yet. But, so, a little bit different. Obviously, the experience that I had versus Marvel. My strategy, very, very different. So, much less reactive. Far more about playing the absolute most aggressive possible game you can. Trying to curve out as aggressively as possible. I think this is where my deck gets rewarded versus a build like the one that's become popularized by Sean McLaren's performance at GP Montreal, which is a great deck. I think it has a lot of versatility, but it loses out a little bit in the ability to just have the nut draw, the craziest curve outs, and avoid flooding out. I found that the one thing I really enjoyed about my deck was, except for the rare moments of flooding, it was extremely consistent on mana and on curving. It was very good that way, and I just like playing strategies that have that consistency. And against Marvel, it's super critical. If you can apply that pressure, and if you can get past their roadblocks by having big enough stuff that they're chumping instead of trading, and using your removal to good effect where it's effective. And that's why after board against Marvel, my primary strategy is not to remove my removal spells, but swap Fatal Pushes for what I had on the board, which was Never to Returns and Grasp of Darkness. Grasp of Darkness, I realized afterwards, is actually one of the most critical spells you can have against the Marvel deck, because it completely undercuts all of the sort of low to mid-range threats that they play in order to slow you down. So it kills their Virtuoso, kills Rogue Refiner, kills Trackers, and really cuts down their ability to slow down your game plan while you continue to apply pressure. So I thought that was an important learning for me. My other tech against Marvel, not really tech, but my other tool against Marvel, aside from the 4 Transgress in the board, which is really valuable, was 3 copies of 2 or 3, I don't remember off the top of my head right now, but copies of Manglehorn. Manglehorn did some pretty real work, especially when combined with Oath of Nissa to help accelerate me towards finding copies of Manglehorn. So I ended up going 3-1 against Marvel, beating some very solid players, playing very solid builds. Chandra is pretty scary, but if you have Constrictor and it doesn't get killed, it's not that hard to go above 4 toughness on the majority of your creatures quite quickly. So that's one of your big mechanisms for trying to beat that deck. And then other than that, it's going big and going fast and providing enough pressure. At one point, I did have a long tusk cub larger than their Ulamog. It was a 22-22 long tusk cub.
Oh my god!
So they actually had to keep their Ulamog back on defense to consistently, indestructively chump block my enormously large long tusk cub. It was like long tusk behemoth. So that was fun. Long tusk cub is a wacky card, and I love it. I love it so much. So that was my experience against Marvel. I think that the strategy that I was trying to employ, it's a tight one, but it does prey on their variance, and it's pretty good because your variance is quite low. This deck is very consistent in applying its game plan time and time again. The other thing that I think was very useful in this matchup, also surprisingly useful in a lot of matchups, good against zombies, good against a lot of stuff, was Blossoming Defense. I had 2 copies in the main, 1 additional copy in the board, and against zombies, it's surprisingly important for disrupting their attempts to undercut your key creatures.
push and grasp and stuff like that.
Yeah, because the green-black Constrictor deck it's a little bit less kind of bluntly linear than Zombies. Zombies is like play things, play more things, then play more things. This one relies on playing things in a certain order and having the right things on the board at the right time in order to get the extra value out of those synergies. And without those synergies, it can fall behind. So Blossoming Defense helps to make sure that your Winding Constrictor sticks around. It helps to make sure that your Walking Ballista, which does work against zombies, also sticks around. And it's really good against Harness Lightnings because they don't get any energy.
Correct.
And obviously against things like Control.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on to my round 10 result. Round 11. We already talked about round 10. Round 11, I'm up against Black-Green, Sean McLaren, who ended up top 8ing the event and doing quite well. It was a pleasure to meet him. He was like really friendly. He's kind of a quiet guy, so that was kind of like interesting. But here's how it went down. So game 1, I kind of have a slow start, and I just get completely destroyed. Not knowing his list beforehand, I snap off on Unlicensed on a Constrictor, which is probably a mistake. If you actually look at his list, he's not too dependent on Constrictor. It's certainly a Lightning Rod, and he definitely used it like one against me, and it definitely cost me. I ended up getting crushed by 2 huge Tireless Trackers.
Fun fact, 2 days before this tournament, I sent Massimo a link that said, hey, I like this green-black deck, take a look. It was a link to the article Sean McLaren had posted of his exact build. And if Massimo had only respected me enough to click on this link...
I probably did look at it, I just didn't look at who wrote it.
Massimo just assumes everything I send him is a phishing scam. So yeah, just doesn't click on my links.
Game 2. I have a stacked hand of removal, and I'm like decently ahead on board, or like I've got things kind of going on. A small board. And I'm like, oh, I can't lose. This is perfect. And then he plays Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, and I just breathe a deep sigh. I'm like...
of sadness, to be clear.
Yeah, just of like disappointment and just like the game like not going how I wanted at all. Just like if he had played like any 2 or 3 creatures, I probably would have won the game. But I ended up pushing some plants and probably misplaying by not cutting to ribbons an 0-1 plant.
Yeah. And to be fair, those plants, they push back.
Yeah, they get wrecked. They'll
cut you.
They'll cut you deep. So yeah, I just lose a bunch of turns later to just a bunch of plants and a Nissa, and I just can't seem to outreach her. I do my best. I think I do eventually kill her. You know, pushing some plants and getting in some damage, but it bought him too much time.
By that point, it's too late.
Yeah, and apparently I have 2 cut to ribbons in my graveyard. And I think it's like I'm 2 points off lethal or something like that. Yeah. So it was like an actually interesting scenario where I potentially could have won the game if I had played a little bit tighter and played to my outs. I think I ended up drawing a Chandra 6. No, this is game 2, yeah. So drawing a Chandra 6 off the top and having to plus her, or having her in my hand, pushing a plant, plussing her, killing Nissa, and then like dealing 3 to my opponent. But if I had just 6'd my opponent and then like ribbons, I could have potentially won the game. But it was a little awkward. It didn't quite work out that way, but yeah, so I ended up losing game 2, and that was a loss against Sean McLaren.
It's interesting that you bring up Nissa, because I think that's a card I want to emphasize and highlight from my own experience on the other side of that matchup. So my deck was featuring 3 copies of Nissa alongside I think 3 or 4 copies of Rishkar as the top end of my curve. And Nissa did so much work. I think, based on this experience and based on the kinds of things that Nissa has done in the past in Standard, I think Nissa is one of the most criminally underrated Planeswalker options that's available in the format right now. I think it just creates a lot more value than you expect, and plants will get you. Plants will get you every time.
Plants will get you.
If you've seen the movie The Happening, you know what I'm talking about.
I haven't seen it.
And if you haven't, then you don't know what I'm talking about.
Correct.
I'm not going to explain myself. Actually, no. I'm not going to tell anyone to go watch The Happening. It's an objectively terrible movie. M. Night Shyamalan at his absolute worst. Never see that. Anyway, Nissa Voices Zendikar did some serious work for me, especially in the next round that I'm going to talk about. So this one was A, probably the most interesting match that I played, and B, easily the most fun and satisfying opponent that I played the entire tournament. Pro Shaheen Surani on his usual approach, which is control. He was playing a blue-black control deck of his own design. It looked very, very good, very tight, extremely well thought through, and he was just a delight to play against. Really fun guy, really casual. You know, we were chatting it up over the course of the match, all the while playing a really complex game of Magic, and I don't think I enjoyed anything else that weekend more, aside, of course, from hanging out with Massimo, because he's a cool dude. His build was featuring 4x Yaheni's Expertise as his primary mechanism of crowd control, which he would usually combine with either a removal spell, like a Never to Return, or a Liliana to get things that were a little bit bigger. I casually asked him after the match was over. Ultimately, I won this match 2-1. The game that I lost was a rough one. I'll get to that in a sec. But I asked him afterwards, so how much do you miss Languish? And he just gave me this look of pain and hardship. And he said, so much. Oh, so much. Yaheni's Expertise, you are no Languish.
No, not even
especially against zombies, where they can outpace that card pretty quickly. Anyway, he was playing a build with a lot of the removal spells you'd expect. Torrential Gear Hulk, Lilianas, and some very spicy tech out of the board. Out of the board against decks like mine that were featuring Scrap Heap Scrounger in order to have some game against these control decks. He was featuring none other than, drumroll, Complete Disregard.
Wow, do you remember this one?
The 3-mana Devoid card that exiles a creature with casting cost or power?
I think it's casting cost.
One of those two things, 3 or less. And he somehow managed to always have the Complete Disregard on the exact moment that I had a Scrap Heap Scrounger, and it was ridiculous. It was the most amazing technology out of the board, and it made me feel bad about myself. But the big thing I want to highlight here is how terrified he was throughout this match of Nissa hitting the field. Nissa for him was effectively an unwinnable situation. The fact that it came down on 3 when he might not have a removal spell up, when he might not have anything good to do, was generally backbreaking. One match, he tapped out to play a Lily to try to take care of something. He, passed it across and said, "Do you have the Nissa?" And in that situation, I didn't, to his infinite satisfaction, and that was the match that I lost. The other two, I had the Nissa, and it was simply backbreaking. Building up an army that goes wide, but also gets big, / just plussing up until the point where you can use its ultimate to gain huge card advantage is enormously effective. The one other thing I will say, giving big props to Shaheen Surani here, is he had some very interesting and creative uses of Disallow's ability to counter abilities. Most people are thinking about it as countering Ulamog's Exiles and things like that, but the number of times that he countered things like a Scrap Heap Scrounger activation to make sure I didn't have a threat on the board. He countered a Nissa downtick so that I wasn't able to put 3 counters on all my guys with my 2 Mining Constrictors in play.
Oh my god.
And other things like that were very, very real. I think at one point he even countered an activation on Longtusk Cub. Not the plussing, but the triggered ability that gave me some more energy, which was fueling the cycle of energy generation that I was going to use to play out more threats. And I just very, very tight play from that guy. Really, really cool guy to play against. Awesome. It was a great match.
Sick. I'm gonna chat my round 12. So this is Teamer Marvel, but this time it's Ben Rubin. Ben Rubin is in the Pro Tour Hall of Fame, so I forgot that, but I did ask him, "Are you the Ben Rubin?"
And this was the match where I was sitting right next to Mr. Ben Rubin.
Yeah, we were,
and across from Massimo. We were playing next to each other at the top table at the time, which was neat.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. So we got to have some nice chit chat between Shaheen, myself, Ben Rubin, and Dan. It was pretty enjoyable.
Yeah. At one point, Massimo asked him, as you mentioned, "Are you the Ben Rubin?" To which he said, "Well, yeah, I guess." And then I think we replied with, "Well, to everyone is that person to themselves." So I'm sure any other Ben Rubin you asked would still be the Ben Rubin as far as they were concerned.
That's true.
This was the Ben Rubin.
The Ben Rubin, yeah. So what ended up happening in game one is he had a decent start and he never draws Marvel. This is kind of like the dream scenario, of course. Like turn one, you're on the play. They don't draw Marvel in time, you win. Having a game up against Marvel is really, really important, especially on Mardu Blue without any counter spells in the main deck. If you can accomplish that, you've probably won the match already. Game two, I'm on the draw, and this is probably the highlight of the tournament in terms of play for me. So I go turn one, Toolcraft Exemplar, and turn two, I have a Heart of Kieran, and I must have had a Scrap Heap or something in my hand. But Ben Rubin's representing Censor. And so my plan is to not play into Censor. Maybe this is a mistake, but the majority, in my opinion, I think playing into Censor is incorrect. I think resolving a Heart of Kieran or resolving a 3-power creature, even if it's a turn later than you would optimally like, is relevant when you're trying to get under things. And their counter suite and their removal suite is so limited that turning one of them on is not necessarily worth it.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because in that match, when you were playing and I was playing Shaheen, I asked him afterwards why because it became fairly evident over the course of the game that he wasn't playing Censor. And I was very curious, and he said, I'm actually on Anticipate instead. And I asked him, why no Censors? And he said, right now, with 0 copies, I still have Censor in my deck. As long as I have open mana, 2 or more open mana, and I'm playing blue-black, everyone assumes I'm on Censor. And they play around it, and it creates this virtual advantage that I don't even need to have Censor in my deck to deliver on. And it's exactly the kind of risk that you're talking about playing around. And against, a Marvel deck that you've seen Censor, obviously you play around it, but against something like a blue-red or blue-black deck, you would almost certainly automatically assume to play around not having that 1 extra mana up. And that creates a very real virtual advantage for them that's amazing that they can get with having no copies in their deck.
Yeah, definitely. Censor is a really interesting metagame card that way.
Yeah. It's the best card you're not playing.
Yes.
Intentionally.
And rightfully
intentionally,
so. Yeah, exactly. So what ends up happening in this game, in game two, as I said, I had turn one Toolcraft Exemplar. Turn two, I think I make a sick play. What I do is, even though it's typically correct to jam your artifact on turn two so that your Toolcraft has 3 power, I elect not to. I actually just attack for 1, signaling to Ben that I don't have a turn 2 artifact. In response, he jams a Shielded Aether Thief and blocks to get that sweet energy, but I managed...
Sweet energy.
That sweet energy he needed. But I managed to jam a Heart of Kieran after blocks, after my attacks. And that Heart of Kieran goes on to win the game. And I think I surprised Ben Rubin, which is like just the most mind-blowing thing.
Yeah. Just became immediately aroused for the remainder of the day.
It was just ridiculous. It felt great. And I land a turn 4 Gideon, or I get a Gideon at some point at least, and do manage to crush him. But later on, after we were talking the match, I was helping him configure his phone for some reason, because we had the same phone. Yeah. So that was interesting. He mentioned that that turn 2 Heart of Kieran play was very good. Yeah. And I was very happy with myself. So shout outs to me. And shout-outs to Ben Rubin for being just classy, super classy guy.
You know what? I'm going to shout-out to Massimo as well. That way it's not just awkwardly him shouting out to himself. Because he deserves it. It was a good play. Real good play, Massimo.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to my round 13. So this is Sultai Marvel. And this is the disaster matchup for any Mardu variant.
And this is one you're playing at the side table in the feature match area.
That's correct. Yeah, so I got my first feature match ever, but we're not on camera, so it's whatever. But the guy, he's a Montreal native. He was super friendly, super gracious in his loss at the end of the round. Really, really cool guy. I definitely enjoyed playing against him. Although I certainly got lucky in this match win. So this is like the terror matchup. Like this is you're like I'm playing Mario Vehicles. If I only face Sultai Marvel, I'm gonna 0-5 this event and go home and cry about it. Like it's very, very hard to win this matchup. I lost to it in a semis of a PPTQ. Really early in the season, as apparently the first Sultai Marvel list to come out on Magic Online, like in the results, it was from a Toronto local. And so like that list sort of existed in our metagame for a little while. I knew about it. I knew the pieces it was playing, which certainly I think gave me a leg up in that sense.
Massimo, you wanna tell us what is it about Sultai Marvel in particular that you feel is so disastrously bad for the Mardu deck?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good question. A lot of the Teamer Marvel decks aren't necessarily leaning on Attune with Aether to fix their mana, but are instead leaning on Traverse the Uvenwald. So the
Sultai decks.
Sorry, that's correct.
Are leaning on Traverse.
Correct. Okay. I messed up. So they have a Delirium component that is relatively straightforward for them to turn on. The only thing that they really have to make a concession to is some copies of Vessels of Nascency, which are still certainly a good card in its own right, as we've seen across like various standard formats.
A 3-mana Impulse when you're searching for a combo piece that it can find in Aetherworks Marvel is still very real.
Very real.
Yeah.
It replaces itself. It's like you get to split it up. And so Ishkana is a real disaster piece against Mardu decks. You just like Black-Green Delirium is another terrible matchup. That's basically those are the two matchups you want to dodge the most, simply because Ishkana is nearly unbeatable. Cut to Ribbons helps a lot in that they have to block with their Ishkana. You can get it out of the way, 2-for-1 yourself, but then you still have access to some reach. But when they're also marveling at the same time, it's like a lot of things have to go right for you to get through their Ishkanas and their Ulamogs. And they're also probably running some copies of Demon of Dark Schemes, which at instant speed wraths your attackers, kills your Gideon. It's like pretty messed up. It's like, it's just like a lot of...
like their whole top end is specifically aimed at ruining your day.
Exactly. All their payoff cards, every single Marvel spin, no matter if they hit anything, it's disastrous.
And they still can absolutely hit turn 4 Ulamog, just like their teamer brethren.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, what ends up happening in this round is game 1, I had a super close game, which leaves my opponent at 1 life. And he hits me with Ulamog a couple times. I have 3 cards left in my library. I find Cut to Ribbons, and it's not enough. Like, I cut his only blocker, but it gives him enough energy to spin his Marvel to get another blocker back. And so it, like, barely stabilizes him. And then, of course, I have 0 cards in my library the next turn, so I lose.
And I think that's another really interesting thing that I think I learned a little bit about over the course of this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really challenging thing to learn how to master is the combat math, the additional layer of combat math that goes into how much energy am I giving my opponent by applying this pressure.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Not only are there blockers out there to be speed bumps, to trade with your guys and slow you down, but when they have Marvel out, that Whirler Virtuoso is often worth, 3 energy when it comes down, and another, 1 or 2 or 3 energy as it and its Thopters die.
Yeah, like the Thopters only cost 2 energy to produce, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the combat math of, okay, great, I push through a couple more damage, I remove a couple of blockers, but now they get another Marvel spin is really tricky for an aggressive player to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really good point. And so I think, it just shows the power of the deck, I think, in that, especially that deck, Sultai Marvel, just every spin matters so much. And so I left my opponent at 1. I was kind of distraught about it because, like, when your opponent's at 1, like, there must have been something else you could have done.
Right.
But it didn't end up mattering, thank goodness. I didn't get punished.
Literally a game of small edges.
Yeah.
There's 1 life missing that you...
Exactly. So game 2, my opponent stumbles and I crush them. I counterspell my opponent's Ishkana with no Delirium. And then he manages to resolve a second Ishkana with Delirium, but it doesn't matter. And I still just run him over. So I managed to put him off tilt with Metallic Rebuke for long enough to close out the game. Game 3, this is the really interesting one. So I skip turn 4 to hold up Rejection, but I have Gideon in hand, and I jam a Gideon on turn 5. And I was talking about this a little bit earlier in the cast. And a Ceremonious Rejection gets a Marvel on that turn. So my opponent jams Marvel, and I have it, which is great. Now I have a Gideon in play, and they have almost nothing. So after a number of turns, my opponent's at a relatively stable life total, surprisingly. I think he's close to about 15. But I have a Gideon, a Heart of Kirin, and a Aethersphere Harvester in play. And my opponent has to choose. They have 8 mana, and they traverse for an Ishkana. So they have 7 mana, and I have 1 blue up. And they have to make a very critical choice of playing around Metallic Rebuke or playing around Ceremonious Rejection. Because if he jams Ishkana, I'm just going to Metallic Rebuke it. If he jams Marvel, I'm just going to Ceremonious Rejection it. But I only have 1 card in my hand. So he needs to play the guessing game. And he chooses Marvel, and I slam the second Rejection. And it was just like the perfect scenario for me in that I drew both Rejections and he cast 2 Marvels. So I managed getting him off that entire turn essentially for 1 mana. I untap, I crew my Heart of Kirin, attack with Gideon, and I believe I put him down to 5. And so my opponent then untaps, slams his Ishkana with Delirium, and I'm like, okay, well, this game is certainly not over. There's a lot. I don't have any like real cards left in my hand. I'm going to have to fight through this Ishkana, and my Gideon is likely to die. Fortunately, I top deck Declaration Stone. So goodbye to your 1/2s. Tick up my Gideon, tick him down to crew the Heart of Kirin. You have to chump Gideon because you're at 5. Bring me to 1, and my opponent scoops and offers me a very strong handshake. Congratulates me on my win, and I'm like very happy to go about my day after pissing my pants for 50 minutes.
And that would be the last time for at least another hour that Massimo would shake hands effectively.
Yes, the mystical handshake.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Do you want to tell us any more insights?
I've got a couple little anecdotes from these other few rounds before I'll hand it off to you for your kind of big spicy story, and then I'll close out with the last couple of matches of my tournament. You can finish off. Perfect. So the couple of interesting anecdotes for me. First one was a matchup against a very, very tight win in 3 against Zombies. The last game of which was a huge grind fest that ultimately ended out with just a tiny little edge, where my opponent was, I think, 1 creature away from Ormondal, which would have been disastrous for me. The interesting thing that happened during this was my opponent, in trying to be more proactive, used his Westvale Abbey to build up creatures towards Ormondal, mm-hmm. And in doing so, he chose not to return his Dread Wanderer to the battlefield a couple of times, and not use it ultimately, on a slow basis, but ultimately as a chump blocker. Mm. And it may or may not have cost him the game. He and I talked about it. We agreed that I don't think it did. But one of the observers, immediately after the game was over, he burst out shouting at my opponent, telling him that he had made such a huge error in not returning his Dread Wanderer. And after this person had left, I commented on how it was strange that guy would comment, and what does he know? And my opponent said, well, actually, he created the deck for the Pro Tour team that won with the Zombies deck, so he probably knows what he's talking about. And that was a learning for me. That guy knew some things.
Nice.
The other fun anecdote for me was, I think it was round, I'm going to say 12 or 13, I'm not sure, against a guy named Florian Koch, who was fresh off coming back from the Pro Tour the week prior. Great player, really great match. Probably one of the most technically excellent people I think I've ever played against. I think he made exactly 1 mistake over the course of the entire match, and it was disastrous, and it cost him the match. And it was in response. I think I put him on like anti-tilt by my own error, and then he made one mistake and it cost him the game. And what that was, this was game 3. I attacked into his block because he was on Aetherworks Marvel, Teamer Marvel, and he chose to block my Long Tusk Cub with a Tireless Tracker. I didn't pump my Cub up high enough to survive the combat with the tracker for whatever reason. It was a mistake on my part. I thought that it was more worthwhile for them to trade, so I had the energy for other stuff. But in retrospect, I should have pumped it, and not pumping it ultimately would have meant I lost the game. And I passed priority. He chose to then activate another ability on one of his creatures. I think he sacked an Evolving Wilds to get another clue, but he didn't have enough energy, so he didn't have enough mana to crack a clue and uptick his Tireless Tracker. And him taking that action gave me priority again in order to be able to go, actually, I will pump my Long Tusk Cub, resulting in me keeping the Cub, which ended up applying the pressure over the next few turns that ultimately won me the game. And in retrospect, we both recognized it more or less immediately. And right after the match, he said, I can't believe I passed you back priority. I lost the match by passing priority.
Yeah, it's true.
And that was an interesting learning for both of us, I'm sure. The one other thing that happened in the interim is I played against a white-black mid-range deck, moving a little bit more towards control. So Anguished Unmakings and Gideons and Grasp of Darkness and Fatal Push and Transgress Main and a whole suite of things that are a little bit scary for me to play against for sure. But ultimately, I won out the day in that matchup in 3. His second game 2, he totally ran away with the game via Gifted Aetherborns, being able to play a really, really brutal game of gaining life and having 3 toughness, all while being deathlinking little beasts. Not literally beasts, figuratively. But ultimately, I think the learning from that matchup was mid-range trying to be control is actually not that great in this position, because they don't have the tools to be matching you just straight up 1-for-1, because they're still trying to apply a little bit of pressure, they're still trying to be a little bit aggressive, and they're still trying to come back into the game partway through, as opposed to waiting until it's completely locked out and then playing a threat and killing you, like a control deck would. And that inability to completely match you on point lets you build up these creatures that then become really difficult for them to answer effectively.
Especially in black-green, right?
Yeah. And so now all of a sudden, I have 8/8 Long Tusk Cubs and 4/5 Winding Constrictors and 4/4 Rishkars and an army of plants. By the way, Nissa does work here yet again. And I think that ability to just keep pushing through that little edge where they can't quite match you point for point makes that match, I think, a little bit favorable, but certainly tough if they draw the right stuff.
Cool. I mean, I like black-white a lot. I'll take a look at this person's list if I can find it online, because I want to play that deck.
It was a very solid build, very solid list, and I think it was tough for sure. Tough to play against. I think the learning for me was against decks that are trying to be tricky with planeswalkers, and when those planeswalkers aren't Chandra, big Chandra, Glintsleeve Siphoner does an unlimited amount of work. Glintsleeve Siphoner, which was a 4 of in my deck, is an extremely powerful card in the right circumstances, with Menace being able to push through damage that you don't expect, being able to be Dark Confidant when you have Winding Constrictor out, straight up better than Dark Confidant when you have Winding Constrictor out, and also being able to get you extra energy that feeds your Cub and that turns it into a giant destructive beast. So I like the deck. I think it's interesting. I don't know that it's in a great position against Marvel, which is probably its biggest weakness. Yeah. Because all it can do
is transgress.
It can transgress, and it can kill a Marvel with Anguished Unmaking, and it can kill an Ulamog with Deck and Stone and Anguished Unmaking. But even then, like, they've exiled your Gideon, they've exiled your Sorin. They've really undercut your plans.
Fair enough. All right, so let's talk about round 14. This is a bit of
Let's do it.
This is a bit of a tragedy for both of us. A comedy of errors, perhaps.
Round 14 was not fated to go the way of Massimo and I.
Yeah, so I was X and 2. at this point going into round 14. That's 11-2. So I had a very good shot at top 8ing. I think the best breakers in maybe in the tournament. I think Sean McLaren and maybe a couple others had better breakers than me. So if I were to win this match, I could ID with a high certainty of a top 8. And so I sit across from another local Torontonian. His name is Liam Kane Mayer. So a Toronto local who plays a ton of Standard at one of the big stores here in Toronto. Certainly a strong player. 16 years old. He's like a friendly kid, kind of awkward. But I did I did enjoy playing against him. But this is the recorded highlight of the tournament by far. So if you haven't seen it, there's this excellent handshake. I'll link a GIF in the episode description. I'll also link the coverage of this round, as I was the feature match for this round. If you want to see me just get completely crushed, this is the place to do it.
And embarrassed before the match even starts.
Yeah, I got Paul Cheon and Marshall Sutcliffe laughing at us.
The lols were very
Yeah, the lols were all over the internet. So that happened. So we start with an awkward handshake. Not a good start. And Liam is on straight Mardu vehicles.
Whoa. You're not going to explain what happened with the handshake? Give the people what they want, Massimo.
Okay, so here's what happened with the handshake.
Explain yourself, sir.
So this is what happened. If you're at your computer, pause the episode, watch the handshake before you hear my explanation.
We'll wait.
We'll wait very patiently. So this is what happened. And I've talked to people about this, and I've heard both sides where people are on my side and people are on his side. So what I do is, we're told by the officials, okay, you're good to start. So I extend my hand to my opponent being like, go ahead. I do kind of like a light sweeping motion, or maybe like a flick.
Like a hand-based point, almost.
Almost, but with my hand extended.
Your
like
full hand.
Full hand. And just as my opponent's on the play, he won the die roll, go ahead. I'm ready. We've done our mulligans. And he knows this. So he thinks that this is a handshake opportunity, or like I'm offering a handshake. So he goes for it. And I'm moving away as he's going for it. And then we touch a little bit. And then I realize he wants to handshake. So I go for like a huge handshake. I'm like, we're already probably on camera.
Over the top. Yeah.
Yeah, we're already on camera. We've already embarrassed ourselves. Let's make it at least real now. And Liam, my one point of advice is you should improve your handshake skills.
Maybe you thought you were offering the concession. He's like, perfect. I'm ready. I'm ready to close it out right now.
Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to talk with Liam since then. I haven't seen him. I do want to congratulate him on his top 8 and his invite to the PT, which is obviously very exciting. I think he played very well in our match, and I think he certainly deserved the win. That being said, my frustration about this match continues to linger to this day. The fact to me that Liam was able to go X and 2 in a Marvel heavy meta is astounding to me. I played variations of this deck list for a long time, and there was no question in my mind that no straight Mardu deck should be anywhere near the top 8.
And to clarify, the deck he was on was effectively the classic build of Mardu vehicles, the earlier build,
yes,
before the new set was released.
Right, so it's very similar essentially to what you were used to seeing. No blue anywhere to be seen. So his Marvel plan, and huge props to Liam for this, 2 Declaration Stones in the main deck, which I think is an excellent choice, very smart. It's great against zombies, which was obviously going to come back in force after its win at the PT, which was the weekend before. And obviously it's very good, and I'd probably bring it in the sideboard, and obviously it'd be good main board as well against Marvel. So huge shout out to him for that addition. He's also got 4 Transgressed and a Dispossess on the sideboard, so playing 5 hate cards, where I was previously only paying 4 out of the board. So in another way, certainly a leg up in that matchup. So we talked after the match, and he said that he went 3-1 against Marvel, certainly due to these small changes that he made. So it's not as if they were completely undeserved, but even so, I don't think him only facing Marvel 4 times, whereas at that point I had faced it 8 or 9 times, just is ridiculous to me. And the fact that he had a 75% win rate was also ridiculous. But to back him up, there was another Mardu Vehicles player in straight Mardu who also top-aided. Neither of them made it past the quarterfinals rounds, and they both lost to Marvel, to no one's surprise.
Is there anything else about his about what he was playing with that seemed to be 75% of the norm that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so he's got 3 Gideon Ally of Zendikar and 1 Chandra Torch of Defiance in the main deck. Huge shout down to Liam on this choice. I cannot agree with this. 1 Chandra's fine, but you should definitely play the 4 Gideons. 4 Veteran Motorists. 2 Thalia Heretic Cathar main board makes no sense to me whatsoever. So I really think that this list could have been improved, but the choices that he made were obviously good ones, not including that choice.
And if you don't believe Massimo on this, Paul Cheon will back him up.
Yes.
As he did on stream by thinking that it was Massimo with the 3 Gideons and sassing Massimo for a solid 5 minutes about his decision.
Yes, correct. But then he eventually realized that it was Liam, and so I'm in the clear in Paul Cheon's
Perfect.
picks.
You're all good.
So let's see what I have watched this match a couple times as it was on camera. So I'm going to give you sort of the spark notes if you don't have the time to watch it yourself. It's not super exciting, and if you want to watch it, but it might be worth it for you. So game 1, Liam has the nut draw, and he's on the play. Turn 1 Toolcraft, turn 2 Heart, turn 3 Toolcraft Crew attack for 7. While I have nothing but a turn 2 Heart of Kirin, so obviously much worse. And after this attack for 7, he follows up with 2 Thraben Inspectors. So used all his mana every turn, generated a ton of threats.
And generated a lot of future card advantage waiting to go, sitting on the board.
Exactly. And I managed to, I think I played to my outs as best as I could. I play a Scrap Heap Scrounger and managed to force his Heart of Kirin to attack by itself. I have Unlicensed, but Liam has the second Heart of Kirin, which was just another nail in the coffin for sure. I end up falling to 4, willing to go down to 3 to cast a Toolcraft Exemplar to try and stabilize my board. Toolcraft Exemplar is terrible on blocks, so I go to crew my Heart of Kirin, bash for 4, and at this point, I need my opponent to whiff on a crew. My opponent has the turn 5 Avacyn. Another reason why this is just a terrible matchup. This is another disaster matchup for Mardu Blue is straight Mardu. You're just a worse mid-range deck in every way. They're playing better cards than you, and there's nothing really you can do at that point. So he has the Avacyn, and I scoop because he can crew his Heart of Kirin, and I'm at 2. That's game 1. Game 2 is a little more interesting. I'm on the play, and I see opening hand of 4 lands, an Aethersphere Harvester, a Nahiri, and a Chandra Torch of Defiance. And this game, if you watch it on camera, especially in the Twitch chat, a lot of people were commenting on turn 4, I snap Unlicensed off on my main phase to kill his Thalia Heretic Cathar, which in the end I don't think mattered. And I think the crucial misplay was actually 1 turn earlier. So not a great hand for me, but the fact that I have Aethersphere Harvester means that if I draw any creature, I can stabilize my life total, I can put pressure on a turn 4 Gideon, which my hand is super, super soft to. But on turn 3, I draw an Unlicensed Disintegration. And at this point, I should have really paused, looked at my hand, looked at the board, and made a smart decision about how to sequence my removal to support my Planeswalker. I think I thought about it for a little while, and I got greedy and thought the 3 damage from Unlicensed, which historically in this matchup is very important to hurt your opponent's Planeswalkers. I decided to keep it in hand, jam my Aethersphere Harvester, and then keep the Unlicensed at a later date to hopefully answer a Gideon or something along those lines. My opponent has the ultimate punish of turn 3 Heretic Cathar when I have an Aether Hub in hand. So I can't literally cast any of my 4-mana Planeswalkers. So after jamming my turn 3 Aethersphere Harvester, my plan was to hopefully he stumbles. If he doesn't, I play Chandra minus, or Nahiri minus, exile your Scrap Heap Scrounger, and then whatever his follow-up play would be. But the correct play, in retrospect, was look at my hand see that if I have a removal spell for his turn 3 threat, or even for Scrapheap Scrounger, that my turn 4 Planeswalker would survive and actually do some work, was certainly the correct play, even though I was missing out on 3 damage. So my opponent, after I kill his Thalia, he resolves a Gideon, makes a 2/2, and starts beating down. There's not much I can do, and the game is over at that point. So it's kind of interesting that the heuristic of develop your board in the opening turn, save your removal for when it matters, kind of bit me in the butt this time. Playing Aether Sphere Harvester on turn 3 just completely destroyed me, and the game was over at that point. I don't think the timing of my unlicensed mattered. I don't think anything after that point mattered at all.
Right, and you recognize that you were taking a risk playing the Harvester because you had no visibility to a creature that would be able to crew it. The next turn, you'd play a Planeswalker, which wouldn't be able to crew the Harvester.
Yeah.
But if you were in a position where you had the Harvester, had the Planeswalker, and both of those became sticky, you'd be in a good spot.
Yeah, exactly. Like
if it worked out just that way.
Yeah, the fact that I didn't draw a single creature the whole game is pretty indicative of like not very strong draws. That being said, I didn't keep a very strong hand. So it goes to show like I learned something about sequencing removal, which is surprising that I hadn't learned before, but I learned that. And I learned something about nut draws and how they're good.
I'm curious for that draw.
Yes.
How different do you think that would have or could have played out if instead of a Harvester that had been a Heart of Kiran, given the ability of those walkers to A, to crew the Heart of Kiran, and B, the ability to have a turn 2 into a turn 3 into a turn 4 play?
Yeah, so if that were Heart of Kiran, I not necessarily would have guaranteed won the match, but the match would have been very different. In that, turn 2 Heart of Kiran, turn 3 unlicensed, you take 3, and then on my turn 4, exile your Scrapheap Scrounger, you're tapped out, tick down Nahiri, hit you for 4, my opponent literally can't untap to play Gideon on turn 4, because it'll just die to, if he ticks up, it dies to Chandra plus Harvester it. He does leave behind a 2/2, but I mean, I would have a 3 loyalty to Hiri and a 4 loyalty Chandra or something along those lines.
Right.
So, yeah, it goes to show the power of 1 mana for your spells.
Yep.
Right? It's a good question, for sure.
Cool.
So, I scoop up my cards, I extend a hand. Me and Liam have a reasonably strong handshake that there's no comment on from anybody, which is perfect for me. And I've lost my Winnanen to the top 8, which is disappointing to say the least, but I'm still in the running given I have like some of the best Briggers in the room if I get a win on my round 15.
And so at this point you're sitting at 11-3.
Correct.
Right. Okay. With a gloriously pleasant to look at wristwatch.
Yes.
As the Twitch chat was very excited to point out. So I similarly had a just disastrous matchup that, like Massimo, felt like it was a little bit of a cheat by the universe, because it feels like the kind of deck that in a Marvel heavy environment should have not been capable of making it this far.
Mm-hmm.
And my round 14 match, and I'm going into this round sitting at 10-3,
mm-hmm.
and this is a disastrous loss in 2 games, was against Red-Black Control. So not exactly the kind of deck that's getting a lot of visibility right now, and for good reason. Absolutely disastrous when it comes to being someone holding an aggro deck full of creatures.
Yeah.
But feels like it should be almost a buy if you're on Marvel.
Yeah.
Their only ways to interact with Marvel are for Transgress, and almost every other card in their deck is either intended to generate card advantage via things like Gonti, Kalidas, Obnixilis, or kill creatures, and just kill creatures all day, every day, and then play things like Glorybringer and kill more creatures, and just kill things all the time. Yeah. Any and all the things die against the deck. Which, you'll notice, is not really the objective that Marvel is trying to achieve, and it feels like Marvel gets to just casually execute their strategy.
Yeah.
Now, I asked my opponent after we had completed the match, and he said that he was ultimately 4-1 against Marvel over the course of this tournament, which just blows my mind. I do not know how it is possible that has occurred, but I think at the end of the day, it just goes to show you that the Marvel deck has some very real variance.
Yes.
That you cannot underqualify how significant that variance can be.
Mm-hmm.
Easily the deck in the format that can generate the most raw power, and a turn 4 Ulamog is straight up unbeatable in almost every situation, but sometimes you lose to yourself, and the sometimes are not that uncommon.
And it's heartbreaking when it's against black-red control.
Yeah, where all they're doing is dirtling, casting, Gonti once in a while, getting a card, which is nice. Where their spiciest threat doesn't come down until turn 5. Against that deck, or playing cards like Liliana, which do literal nothing against your deck, losing, 4-1 against Marvel is impressive.
Definitely.
That was some very real gameplay and some very real variance on the part of my opponent and his opponents.
I agree.
So, that match for me went exactly the way you'd expect. Play a thing, it dies. Play a thing, it dies. Play a thing, it dies. Play a thing, it dies to a thing that sticks around and then kills me. Play a thing, he plays Glorybringer, and I lose.
Fair enough.
Which was pretty straightforward as far as matches go. It was, I lost in 12 minutes.
Oh my God.
Because it became very clear very quickly in both games of that match that this was not going to work out. And it was pretty sad because this plus another win in round 15 would have put me in potential contention for top 8. Realistically, I know it almost certainly wouldn't have made it, but would have been in a spot for top 16 because, unlike Massimo, I arguably had the worst breakers in the tournament, thanks to my illustrious loss in round 1 against my opponent with the mono white deck.
Yep, that'll do it.
That'll do it. That will, in fact, do it.
Let's chat round 15. This is the final round.
Let's chat.
This is for all the money, of course, in terms of how you place. This is the one that matters in the end. So I sit down for my opponent. Turn 1 Spire Bluff Canal, but it's blue-red control. Oh my goodness, the relief. My opponent was crushed. Every single table, we were the highest table not in feature match. Every table for the next 5 or 6 tables were Marvel mirrors, which is like the matchup that blue-red control is obviously trying to get. My opponent was very, very upset. And I crushed him.
He was more upset after he was crushed.
Yeah. Actually, there was a moment where we got a deck check, and I thought maybe he cheated because he was so upset in that moment after losing game 1. But he wasn't cheating. He was just spirit broken by the
his
event
rage
coordinator.
Was pure.
Yeah.
It was just a pure, unadulterated rage at not being able to crush one of the many, many Marvel decks that was still at this spot in the tournament.
Definitely. I do feel for him. I can't say that our interaction was particularly pleasant, but I'll get through with the results. Game 1, pretty sure I played around the turn 4 Glimmer of Genius strategy, jam some things, and I crush him in Game 1. Game 2, I have a reasonably strong hand, and I have a Nahiri and a Gideon in hand. So on turn 4, I jam a Nahiri, and he's on the draw, so this is actually good because he's got Glimmer up. He counters it. And turn 5, I land a Gideon. Again, this is sort of the fact that he wasn't able to Glimmer on turn 4 means he didn't have counter spells for my threats.
So you're saying he was on the play? Then?
Yeah, he was on the play. So did I say he was on the draw? Yeah. Sorry, he was on the play. I counter his first Gear Hulk with Metallic Rebuke, and I have Lethal on board. I play around a second Gear Hulk. I don't know if my opponent thought I was just garbage. It's possible that I am. This is really late in the tournament. I'm pretty tired. But I'm okay, I'll play around a second Gear Hulk. I feel like that's the only way I lose this game. I let him survive an additional turn. He glimmers main phase, bottoms, and scoops up the cards. And that was it. That was me on 12-3, a solid 11th place, and $1,000 cool US dollars in my pocket.
Right, which is about, for all of our American listeners, it's about I think $100,000 Canadian.
It feels like $1 million. It's more like 1,400 Canadian dollars.
It's not that different. It's about 1,300.
Yeah,
for all y'all that got really excited about coming up here to
to Canada.
To Canada to do a little shopping, or maybe to just get away.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'll leave it at that. I was pretty happy with my round 15. I was very much on tilt as a result of getting blasted out of the sky by red-black control in round 14. But I was resolved to win this last match so that I could make it into a standing that would be in the money, which would be a minimum of top 64 or an 11-4 record. And I'm sitting at 10-4 as of this going into this last match.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit down opposite Aetherworks Marvel. This is ultimately a success story in 3, following a very similar pattern that I experienced kind of time and again, which was winning the first game with a tight hand on the play with a lot of solid pressure that they couldn't quite match, and missing on one spin, missing on 2 spins, more than enough to just not get there for them.
Yep.
Second round, turn 4 Ulamog was Ulamog on turn 4.
Yeah, it's good.
And then game 3 was the story of me getting flooded and my opponent missing but getting some stuff that continues the process. A total of I believe 7 times.
Oh my god!
And straight whiffing once.
Dude, you earned that $250.
Before ultimately, and I'm applying no pressure, before ultimately landing a Nissa, slowly building a presence, getting my opponent to spin into Chandra, down tick to kill all of my plants, and Blossoming Defense to save a plant, closes it out, kills the Chandra, and then the remainder of my action from there closes the game out.
You earned that $250.
Yeah.
You earned it.
And this was a match where Oath of Nissa showed its quality, with a Manglehorn coming down, locking my opponent out of both their ability to activate the marble that they have sitting in their hand, as well as their ability to effectively block with Thopter tokens off of Virtuoso.
True. And
putting them in a really tough spot where, as Manglehorn's on the stack, they have to decide if they get some activations of Virtuoso in.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, they started by doing that, draining their energy, and putting them off of Marvel a little bit longer. I think this was... this was this game. And then working really hard to kill Manglehorn, and play Marvel on 4 energy, only to have me play Manglehorn 2, kill Marvel, and then put them in the same spot with regards to their inability to create Thopters and block.
Oh my goodness.
So that ultimately worked out. That's how the kind of the last stages of that game played out post Chandra. But both of those Manglehorns I found as the 3rd card off of Oath of Nissa each time.
Wow.
So Oath of Nissa, dig down 3, Manglehorn it up. Oath of Nissa, dig down 3, Manglehorn it up. So Oath of Nissa is Ponder. Ponder is great. You should cast it more often.
That's the takeaway.
That was my learnings from this tournament overall. 1, Oath of Nissa is a gangster of a card. 2, Long Tusk Cub is hilarious.
Yeah.
Because it is a 2/2 for 2 that becomes just Ulamog on crack.
Yep.
And Greenbelt Rampager is just a great card. It has so much interesting utility. It turns on Fatal Push. That card is real gas.
Sick.
And Nissa is the most underrated Planeswalker in the format.
Sweet. Alright, so our GP stories out of the way. Let's try and bring some value to the listener in terms of like what they should be playing moving forward.
And who knows, maybe some value to their pocket.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there you go. You
financial value.
Financial value. You top 64 at GP. You get some financial value.
Yeah.
True.
It's very real.
MTG Finance. That's how it goes.
Boom.
So, Dan, I wanted to ask you just a couple questions quickly on what you think of your deck list, particularly in the current meta, or moving forward, and the black-green sort of energy archetype in general moving forward.
I'm very happy with the deck list that I played. I think the big learning for me was it's probably there's a set of utility cards the deck plays between Fatal Push, Blossoming Defense, Grasp of Darkness, and Never to Return, and potentially Dissenter's Deliverance, which I wasn't really on board with, but I'm thinking might be an opportunity. And Transgress Their Mind out of the board, obviously. And there's some blend of those cards that might shuffle around a little bit to get the right configuration versus what I played, which was 4 push, 2 defense main, and all the other stuff. Grasp, Never to Return, and extra blossoming defense on the board with Manglehorns. So I think that was the one thing, is I think that's probably the area where you have the most mutability to what you expect to be facing. Mm-hmm. Grasp is obviously much better against Mardu. Push is pretty good against zombies. Push is terrible against Aetherworks Marvel. So I would potentially go down a little bit of push and go up a little bit of grasp to be better game 1 in that way. Mm-hmm. But I think the low to the ground, aggressive, tight, consistent version that I played, I'm very, very happy with that. I still think it's well positioned because it can be fast enough to go under control decks. It can be fast enough to apply more pressure than an Aetherworks Marvel deck can deal with without hitting too much variance. Mm-hmm. But it is quite weak to zombies, which I don't think is really heavily represented in the meta right now.
No.
And as Massimo and I experienced in heavily playtesting before the event, this deck makes Mardu its bitch.
With the one exception, if the deck does lose to Gideon, Allied Zendikar.
Yes, as does every other deck. Because Gideon.
Yes.
Gideon's a hell of a card.
Gideon is a hell of a card.
Not Gideon of the Trials, because that card is not good.
I think it's
in Standard.
I think it's good.
Yet.
Maybe
yet, maybe ever. Card seems potentially good in Modern, but that's off the beaten path. Yeah, I think that the matchup against Mardu is quite strong, because you can just go so much bigger, so much faster than they can, and the versatility of the deck falls down a little bit in the face of that much heat. Mm-hmm. Although, obviously, this was the Mardu Blue version that we were testing, so it's possible that isn't quite as true when it comes to the classic Mardu. But I feel like people are going to be moving, especially now, I think a lot of people are moving towards Esper vehicles. I feel like it's even better against a deck that's playing even less
removal.
Yeah, potent removal, yeah. Spell Queller, when everything you're casting costs 2 mana, feels like a sad frown. And a 2/3 is not great against your 8/8 threats. So I like it against Esper vehicles, I think. I haven't playtested heavily. And I think I would still prefer to play this kind of a build over the more kind of mid-rangey, versatile version that Sean McLaren has popularized. Mm-hmm. I think that's great, but I don't like the fact that it kind of goes halfway between Delirium with Flares and the Energy Encounters theme with Constrictor. I like the kind of the all-in version. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's necessarily better, but I think it's
fair.
Yeah.
For me, my takeaway moving forward, I would not play my list as is in GP Montreal. I don't think it's good anymore. I don't think it's good enough. What I found in the weeks of Moto play after the GP is the Aetherworks Marvel decks have become more refined. The number of Shrine of the Forsaken Gods that they are playing makes a big difference. How many Whirlers, most are including Glimmer of Genius, which surprisingly is very good against Mardu because allows you to sculpt your hand, allows you to find your Marvel because you're digging for cards. It just, your game 1 is worse because they're more tuned, and now that, Mardu Blue is the de facto probably correct way to build the deck in the meta, they are 100% respecting the counterspells all the time, and some of them are even bringing in their own negates and their own dispels against you, knowing that Aetherworks Marvel, as soon as it resolves, it wins the game. So playing cards that typically don't do anything, but win you the game in concert with another card, is something that they're willing to bring in, and is just backbreaking against you. You can't beat a Marvel deck if they bring counterspells in against you, with the list that I had. That being said, I am hopeful because a lot of MTGO players have been refining the deck. The deck has shifted to play as many copies as 4 Spell Quellers in the main deck, and Metallic Rebuke also in the main deck. So up to 6 counterspells main deck for Marvel, and just generally good in a variety of matchups. For the Esper or the Mardu Blue favoring the white and the blue more version that people are playing now. Yes. And are they de-emphasizing the red or the black? The black. So there are no fatal pushes, down on unlicensed disintegrations as well. They're actually moving up to Harness Lightning, as is another way for them to fix their Aether Hub mana. I don't love the card, but I see what role it's certainly playing in the deck. I have hope for that list. I am going to test it this weekend at a PPTQ, and I hope I do well. I still have faith in the deck list, but I would certainly lean on the brain child and just the conglomerate power of Magic Online lists and find something that works for you. I think you should just be playing Marvel. 100%. The correct play is to play Marvel. If you want to get an edge, if you want to play a deck that has like tight decisions and can beat Marvel consistently, I would go with the Mardu version. But I'm pretty sure Marvel is just too good not to play.
I'm going to disagree with that. So, and again, I think this is a little bit because of my preference towards consistency over variance, power that comes with variance. Mm-hmm. I think in an environment where Marvel is gearing up to fight back with its own counters, is bulking up on cards like Negate, and is bulking up on other reactive stuff that isn't necessarily dealing with the board-based threats, mm-hmm. I think two things become more true. One, I think mid-range becomes somehow even worse than it is already.
True.
Because when your exciting game plan is playing Obnixilis, which is a good card in the abstract, but is garbage when your opponent is casting Marvel and getting enormous amounts of mana and card value off of it. Mm-hmm. Mid-range is not the right strategy when the primary deck in the format goes over top of everything you're doing.
Yeah.
And now when they're playing Negates that can undercut some of your more potent top-end threats, it's just real bad.
Very bad.
I think there is some interesting other tech coming with the Marvel deck. I'll get to that in a sec. But my other plug would be with this coming back around, one thing that some people are doing with these Marvel decks is now they're cutting Flamecaller. They're going back down the chain. They're being more reactive with Censor and with Negate. And that puts Zombies back in a strong spot mm-hmm. to do what it did at the Pro Tour, which was punish Aetherworks Marvel decks that only really had Ulamog as a great way to crush their opponent. Mm-hmm. And I think in general, the broader result there is effective, high pressure, aggressive decks, potentially even the kinds of like ultra aggressive mono black or ultra non-zombies and ultra aggressive mono red decks, the like budget decks that are popping up, could potentially do some work against an Aetherworks Marvel deck that's not trying to control the board as much and is trying to control the stack a little bit more. Yep. So, and in doing so, I think that the deck that I played is still well positioned against the direction that Marvel is going, and against the kinds of decks that are trying to fight Marvel on level 1. So, play my list. It's amazing, and so am I. The other thing that I was going to mention, which was some pretty sweet tech from the GP this last weekend in place somewhere that mm-hmm. I do not recall the name of. Sorry, everyone. Was Brad Nelson's spicy technology of Ulvenwald Hydra as a potential hit for Marvel, as a crazy Marvel mirror card, because it comes down and it's pretty spicy, helps to hold off. It's fat with reach.
Oh yeah, it's
so reach. Yeah, it shuts down everything your opponent, like, it shuts down one thing your opponent is doing dead, mm-hmm. and or potentially applies some real pressure and hits. But it also ramps you +2 by finding you Shrine, right? Yeah. And helping you go over the top faster by hard casting Ulamogs. Mm-hmm. The other piece of interesting tech that I saw was a list that I want to say was posted on Channel Fireball. I don't remember 100%, but it's a blue-red sort of control deck, but it's like blue-red control ramp that was focused on controlling the middle period of the game and then ramping to hard casting Ulamogs. So it's trying to do what Aetherworks Marvel does, minus Marvel, plus a lot of control, and then still having the ultimate end game of Ulamog via Hugin Archive, via lots of Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. And I think that kind of a build is potentially well positioned against where the meta is going.
Cool. Very cool. Last thing I want to touch on before we sign off. Marvel banning upcoming. It is
100%.
It is announcement week next week. probably going to not edit this episode too hard. We'll see. I always say that, and then I edit it really hard anyways. So we'll see how that works out. But, Marvel's not going to get banned. I think from Wizards' perspective, the format is too diverse. Marvel is winning all the events, but the top 8s are always full of a variety of deck lists.
Yeah, really diverse.
Very diverse. And the format isn't particularly unfun, I think, especially if you have a plan against Marvel. It definitely rewards tight play and making right decisions. I think Marvel, in my opinion, should be banned. But I don't think that Wizards has the justification. And based on their sort of the way they manage the game and their historical bannings, I don't think there's enough justification for them to ban Marvel. So if you're the kind of person that's sitting on a bunch of tickets and thinking about buying into Marvel on Magic Online, this might be the time, as a spike on Magic Online is likely to follow a no banning announcement.
Yeah, and I think what we're almost certainly going to see is on announcement day is an announcement of no changes to standard. What they choose to announce 2 days after the official announcement day is anyone's guess.
It's true.
Wizards is let's say they're playing it fast and loose recently. Not exactly keeping to the communication plan, but in all seriousness, I think the format's diverse. There's still innovation.
Yes,
it's constantly shifting. New decks are coming up and down. The only reason I could possibly see them doing it is because this format lacks the one thing that is generally indicative of a healthy format, which is the viability of mid-range.
Yes.
Right? There are so many potential exciting mid-range strategies that are offered by the cards in this format. Things like Glorybringer, Avacyn, a wealth of great planeswalkers, the higher-end Delirium builds, Ramp. There's a lot of cards for Ramp that seem like they're just itching to get used. Mm-hmm. But none of those strategies are viable for all the reasons that we just talked about for the last hour and a half.
Yeah, and people are trying. Like, I think Teamer Energy is actually a good deck. I've been playing that a little bit. Like,
main deck negate.
I mean, it is pretty mid-range. It's not super low to the ground. You're playing Chandras and Glorybringers.
You're basically playing Aetherworks Marvel post-board.
Yes.
Right? Minus Marvel, and with a little bit more action intended to combat Marvel.
Yes.
But in doing, you're playing like the aggro side of mid-range.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But,
you definitely need to be aggressive. There's no room for mid-range slow decks in this format.
Yeah, something that's trying to come over the top of your opponent with a 6-drop, for example, is not good. Like, for example, if Elspeth was in this format, that card would see zero play, which is crazy because Elspeth is a hell of a card.
It is.
Even like we have a Sphinx's Rev effectively in the format right now,
mm-hmm.
and the card sees very little play, which is crazy, right?
Yep.
But for good reason, because it's pretty hard to play a long game when your opponent and their crazy combo mid-range deck has a better long game than you.
Yeah. Because
they get to cast Ulamogs, and Ulamog is a hell of a card. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all we got. You got anything else you want to say?
No, I just GP Montreal was a ton of fun.
Yes, thank you for
heading out there. Heading out there was great. Montreal is a killer city. All the folks at that event were super fun to play against. All the folks I got to play with, and all my friends I got to go with, super kick ass. Yeah, especially Massimo, but especially everyone else.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to everyone involved in organizing GP Montreal. I hear Gamekeeper gets some flack from some people, but from my experience, I had a great time. The judging staff were great. Everything was run on time. The food situation was not abysmal at all. That being said, it was a pretty small GP, so I guess they get some flexibility there.
It was 800?
I think it was 850.
Yeah. Notable exception, their website is hot garbage. Please,
I forgot about this.
Please, every time that they would update with postings available online, the website would crash and display their source code, which is bad. In case that was not objectively clear, that's not what you want your site to do.
Correct.
So don't in the future.
Congrats to the top 8. Congrats to Daniel Fournier, who was on the last cast, for making the top 8 and going to PT Kyoto, which he was talking about. So
if you're gonna win airfare to go to a PT, Kyoto's one good one to do it for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's all we got. I'm just gonna do the sign off. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. This has been a long episode, but hopefully you got something out of it. We apologize for it being a few weeks after the tournament, but hopefully this is still valuable to you. And if you're not a super spike, hopefully that we, our banter and stuff and just general Magic stuff was enough to keep you interested. So thank you for listening to the whole episode. A reminder to subscribe to us on iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcasting service. You can always find us there, get, notifications straight to your phone. We're on Twitter. Follow us at MTG Spec Podcast for episode updates. Send us feedback, send us deck lists, send us anything. We'd be happy to chat with you. Send us an email at mtgspec@gmail.com. Just if you want to send us a query or something that you'd want to send more on a one-to-one personal basis. Tell your friends about the show. It's the best way to help us grow. And finally, check us out on mtgspeculator.com. Dan, thank you so much for being on the cast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a ton of fun.
Check out the website, guys, and we will see you in a couple weeks.
Bye, everybody.